Hello, fellow YouTube gamers. I know I'm a little late to this topic because a lot of other people have kind of talked about it already, but I kind of want to give my input. Something I've been seeing discussed a lot, even before the Switch was officially announced and we just knew it as the NX, was, is the Nintendo Switch going to support VR, or is it going to have any sort of VR functions? And a lot of people have been talking about this and throwing ideas around, and I kind of want to do the same thing right now. So the first question to get out of the way is, would Nintendo even want VR on the Switch? I mean, we've actually heard Reggie and other people at Nintendo say in the past that they're not so sure about VR just yet because they want to see how it does in the market and how gamers react to it. Now, I know this is very unlike Nintendo, as they're pretty much the ones who introduced touchscreen gaming and motion controls to the masses, so waiting for something and seeing how it does in the market seems unlike them, but I think the reason why they're actually wanting to wait is, one, because they didn't exactly start this VR revolution or whatever you want to call it, so they want to see how other people's products do. And two, I know this was a long time ago, but last time they tried to do VR, they got burned pretty badly with the Virtual Boy. I don't think that that's causing too much trouble, because, again, they did release the 3DS, which had its own 3D effects, but Nintendo's not so sure about doing VR right now, so the chances of them actually putting it in the Switch are pretty slim. But let's say that wasn't the case. Let's say Nintendo was all about including VR as a feature for the Switch. Just how could that be pulled off in a way that would actually succeed? Well, here's what I think. I think that doing a separate headset, a la the PlayStation VR, Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, or pretty much any of those dedicated headsets, is a bad idea. Because those headsets tend to cost a lot of money because they have to have their own dedicated, very well-built display, they have their own motion sensors and all that, and it's also kind of clunky and a little difficult to set up. Not difficult, but just kind of a pain in the ass to set up. And that's all that stuff that I just mentioned, the cost of building it, the clunkiness, is stuff that Nintendo's not really known for wanting to include with their game systems. So if the Nintendo Switch is going to have VR, I think it's going to be something very similar to the Samsung Gear VR. Now, the Samsung Gear VR is pretty much just a small HMD, but it's not really an HMD because it's pretty much just a box with two lenses on it and some face padding and a strap. And what you do with the Gear VR is you slide your Samsung phone into it, anything Galaxy S6 and up. It plugs into the micro USB slot or USB-C, depending on which phone you have, in the side of the headset, and then you just clip it into place, and then you put the headset on, and you adjust the focus and all that. It only takes a few seconds to snap in, because when you put it in, it immediately opens the Oculus app, and you just launch stuff from there. And everything with the headset is done through your phone. So the phone's display is used as the display for the headset. The phone's processing power, the phone's motion sensors, although the Gear VR does have some of its own motion processing and sensors inside of it to offload from the phone. Everything's done by the phone, and all you have to do is slide the phone into it, or snap the phone into place. I think something along the lines of the Gear VR makes a lot more sense for the Nintendo Switch than a dedicated separate headset like the PlayStation VR, simply because the Nintendo Switch is a handheld system. I know people like to point out that Nintendo are saying that it's primarily a home console, but that's complete BS. It's using all mobile components, it's pretty much just a handheld system with a decent amount of power that plugs into your TV. And it's not that big, it's only about 6 inches when it's just the screen, so it could easily snap into a VR headset and be made into a VR system. Of course, there's limitations when it comes to doing it this way instead of the dedicated headset. One, unless they can find some sort of creative solution around this, there can't be any sort of head tracking or room tracking like there is with the Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, or to a kind of crappy extent, the PlayStation VR. You pretty much, the world moves with you in VR. Like, if you're wearing a Gear VR and you move your head around, you can look around in the world, but if you start to crouch up and down or you move your body, the world moves with you, because there's no motion tracking or anything in the phone. You pretty much, it's just the tilt tracking and the spin tracking. So that's one big limitation with that. The second rather large limitation is battery life. Now, anybody that's used a Gear VR, or even something more simple like a Google Cardboard, knows that running VR on a mobile system is very taxing on the battery. I mean, just using the Gear VR, you will only get like 1 or 2 hours of VR gaming in there, and maybe like a few hours of movie watching. The Gear VR does include a micro USB slot on the side of it, so I could see a Switch VR headset kind of having a charging slot on it, although it wouldn't actually charge the system, it would just power it, just like the Gear VR. If you plug the micro USB into it, it just powers the phone, it doesn't actually charge it because the Gear VR is using so much battery power. I mean, sure, most people can only be in VR for like up to an hour or two, and that's pushing it, so maybe battery life wouldn't be that much of an issue, but maybe there's some people who can last a lot longer than that. With a dedicated tethered headset, you don't have to worry about battery or anything. The thing can run for as long as your electricity's on, while a Gear VR style Switch mobile VR headset would only provide a few hours of entertainment at most, and that would be definitely a big limitation. Now, the third limitation that not many people really think of when they think of these kinds of VR headsets is the weight distribution. Now, the Nintendo Switch doesn't really look like it's going to be the biggest or heaviest set handheld system in the world. It doesn't look too heavy, but it's still nowhere near as thin as, say, a Samsung phone or an iPhone. And even the Gear VR with the Samsung phone inside of it can feel just a tiny bit front-heavy sometimes, as it has no counterweights. The Switch is undoubtedly going to be thicker and heavier than a Samsung phone. So what Nintendo would have to do in this headset, or for whoever designs the headset, is they would have to provide some sort of weight distribution system on the headset itself, or some sort of counterweight on the back. And that can change how comfortable the headset is, how easy it is to put on, so weight distribution would definitely be a big limitation. The fourth limitation is processing power. I mean, already the Nintendo Switch is coming out of the gate less powerful than even the vanilla Xbox One and the vanilla PlayStation 4, but with VR, the thing's going to have to be even less powerful than what you would see out of like the PlayStation VR and all that. And the biggest reason is heat. Anybody that owns a Samsung Gear VR knows that the Samsung phones get hot when you are running VR stuff. And it doesn't have to be just games, it can be just movies or whatever. And then the thing will crash and tell you that you need to let the Gear VR cool down. I mean, the Nintendo Switch does have fans built into it that can help with this, but that just further hurts the battery life. So with too much heat means that they can't have it clocked too high, and they can't have it running too hot. So that could be a huge limitation in how the VR is actually running. And now the final limitation, which is without a doubt the most impactful one, is the Nintendo Switch's screen. Not many people really think about this, but the displays built into the HTC Vive, Oculus Rift, and to a lesser extent the PlayStation VR are very high quality, expensive displays. That's where most of the cost of these headsets come into play, is these displays. They have to use low persistence AMOLED displays, and the reason they use AMOLED displays is because AMOLED, or OLED in general, lets you have a much wider range between dark and bright, without darks looking like dark grays or whatever. Like, you won't see black space looking like dark gray with some white specks, it'll actually be completely dark. And that is important for the immersion of a premium VR headset. You see this on the Samsung Gear VR too, as Samsung phones use OLED screens. But if you use let's say the Google Cardboard on some lesser expensive smartphones or some iPhones, you'll notice that when it gets dark, it's not as dark as it should be because there's always a backlight shining through an LCD. And that's the kind of screen that the Nintendo Switch uses as far as we know, and what's actually most likely is an LCD screen. And who knows, it could be a nice high-quality IPS screen, as those don't really cost too much anymore. But even if it is an IPS screen, we're still not going to see anywhere near the quality as we would from an OLED. And that's not the only problem. The Nintendo Switch's screen resolution that we know of so far is either 720p, which is most likely because we've been hearing that the most, or 1080p. Even if it was 1080p, 1080p on a 6-inch screen would still not be enough to give a VR experience that doesn't include heavy pixelation. The Samsung Galaxy S6 phone, which is the one that I own right now, and that's the one that I use my Gear VR with, has a total screen resolution of 2560 by 1440, or 2K. That's the whole screen. And both eyes in the VR headset share that one screen. I can't say exactly which resolution per eye we get, but it's definitely nowhere near as high as the dedicated HD screens that each eye gets when you get the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive. So the games and VR content on the Gear VR looks very, very pixelated compared to what you would see on the PC headsets. And the Nintendo Switch would be far, far, far worse. A screen resolution of 720p with magnifying glasses aimed right at it, especially when it's a 6-inch screen, would not provide for a very clear VR experience. And trust me when I say this, the screen door effect, or the pixelation, is much more apparent than you would think, and it's much more of a big deal than most people would think. So having too much of a screen door effect on a VR headset would be pretty much the final nail in the coffin for VR being on the Switch in this manner. Now, I wanted to talk about this because we saw a rumor lately of a Samsung Gear VR style headset for the Nintendo Switch, and who knows, we could see something like that. That could be more than just a rumor, especially because a headset like this, as opposed to the dedicated tethered headsets, is a lot cheaper to produce. I mean, the Gear VR's $100 retail, and even that is majorly overpriced. If they sold the thing for just a little bit of a profit, just slightly above cost, you could probably buy the thing for like $25. Those headsets don't cost much to produce, and don't cost much to sell as a result, and thus would have a pretty wide adoption rate, but that's only if the headsets worked well. If people started spreading the word that the Nintendo Switch VR headset was crap and it wasn't a very good VR experience compared to what you would get even on the PlayStation VR or the smartphones, then I don't see that selling too well. And combine that with Nintendo's skepticism towards VR and the fact that VR doesn't really have any sort of killer app yet or really a compelling reason to buy it other than being an early adopter, makes me think that the Nintendo Switch having VR, at least in the early years, is not really likely. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments, and you all have a great rest of your day.